This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello listeners, welcome to the Late Late Show. I am your host for this evening, Sophie Smith-Tong. Tonight we're joined by James Hennigan, Deputy Principal at a school in Auckland, New Zealand. James left the UK education system in 2008 and didn't look back. And tonight we find out what keeps him there. We compare the levels of autonomy in education systems in New Zealand and the UK. So get yourself comfy and let's get started.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, good evening all. I don't know about anybody else, but my goodness, teaching is crazy in the summer, isn't it? I always forget how chaotic it gets. Assessments and sports days and shows and transitions, welcoming new families in the early years. I'm absolutely exhausted and we've still got so far to go. But anyway, I've had a cuppa and I welcome you all to do the same. Get that cup of tea, come and chill with me as we wind down. Now, as much as we're all winding down and it's very late on the hump day, I would still love it if you got involved with the conversation this evening. So in a minute, I'll be welcoming James Hennigan, who is a Deputy Principal in New Zealand. Having worked both in the UK and New Zealand, I'm interested in what James has to say about working for an education systems where its schools are some of the most decentralised in the world. And autonomy in the UK education system seems to be disappearing, in my opinion. I'm seeing more and more scripts and schemes. And so I want to hear from you too. Feel free to get involved in the conversation, and you can do so by downloading the Podbean app, and send us in a message or call in. We love to hear your opinions. It's not just about what I have to say, what James has to say. We want to hear what you've got to say. So do send in your messages and call in if you'd like to have a chat. So I don't want to leave it much longer before we invite our guest. James, welcome.
Good evening, Sophie.
Hello, it's lovely to chat to you. Lovely to have you here all the way early in the morning in New Zealand.
Yes, it's morning for me.
It's lovely. We were just saying, weren't we, a minute ago when we were kind of having a little pre-chat that it's the beginning of the day for you. So you're kind of in that sleepy state, but I'm in the opposite sleepy state where it's the end and I've experienced everything going today.
Oh dear.
Yeah. I mean, it's just been one of those days. We have them in teaching, don't we?
Yeah. It's always important to remember it's the best job in the world, but it is a hard job and it is a bottomless pit job sometimes. But I mean, I as a 20-year professional, I still love my job, and I hope that continues for a long time to come.
It's really, really lovely to hear the energy and positivity in your voice. And I'm really excited about delving into your experiences of both of the education systems in New Zealand and the UK. And you left the UK back in 2008. I just want to talk about, before you left, what was your last kind of experience of the education system? It's hard, isn't it? Because when you're removed from it, you forget so quickly. How are you feeling?
Look, it's 2007 is when I left the UK, I guess, there's two parts to this. The moment that there's the leaving, which was, you're saying farewell to a lot of people, but you're also very excited. But there's also the run up to all of that, and that run up for me, I'd always wanted to teach overseas, so I knew this was always coming. But
right.
there were absolutely some push factors, and the school that I was in, and this is before academies get rolled out across the United Kingdom. There's a that change is coming, but we were going through at the school I was in a merging process, and that meant that the school that I was in was basically, it was marked for closing down and being basically the site would be mothballed and turned into another school. And in terms of what that felt like at that school, Well, I mean, I love that place, but it was not a great place to be in terms of the vibe of it at the time. It was the whole senior team basically departed before the start of my last year. We had an acting headmistress, and I began really okay, well, where else could I go? And that was my first school. I was there 4.5 years. It was in a it was just off of council estate housing in Southampton.
Hmm.
Really
And it
loved
was a
being in
secondary.
a secondary school. Yeah,
Hmm.
year 7 to year 11. And it, the kids were great, the staff was great, but that prevailing direction of we're about to effectively be closed really framed me wanting to be thinking of, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And then
Yeah.
that turned into looking at my options. I started firing up the Times Educational Supplement, like looking at what the international options were,
Did you
because
type in New Zealand when you were searching, or
um,
was it more of a let's see what's out there kind of thing?
it started as let's see what's out there.
Mm,
And then there were so that and look, my wife now, my girlfriend back then, Hats is a nurse. So from the way that we were looking at it, it was going overseas wasn't going to be that hard. We were the immigration dream team.
yeah.
Is how we used to. It's how we looked at it at the time. So no, there were a range of things that turned up, and look, to be like some of them were international. I remember interviewing for I don't know if they still have them in the UK, but advanced skills teacher roles. So I was going for that type of stuff back then. So I had about 4 or 5 different things that I was thinking about. New Zealand, basically, there was an advertisement from one of the part of New Zealand that I now live and work in. One of the local schools was advertising, and that turned into meeting the principal of that school at basically he came to the city. I met him down in a lobby in a hotel, and we had a chat. And I came out of that, um, my mindset going in, beginning to get more cynical. And I'm a 4 year teacher at that point. I'm not
Mm,
cynical. I don't think I am to this day, but I could feel it becoming a part of how things were.
yeah.
I came out of that chat with David, who's the principal of that school, and I was excited. I heard about this great opportunity. I walked out of it thinking, you know what, this could be a really good fit, and that turned into a job offer, which turned into me having a really really good chat with Hats, my wife now, as I said, about look, what do we want to do here. She had a job offer literally from one of the main hospital here within 2 days, and
Wow.
before we knew it, that was in September. Come January of 2008, we were here.
It was meant to be. It was all the
I,
right timing.
it worked out. I mean, we turned up. It was never a plan to be here for 16. Well, what is now? What are we into? Yeah, about 16 years now. The plan
Yeah.
was do 2 years. That's what, like, see how it is, and maybe come back.
Do you
The
think that's the only way to survive in education, like changing things up? Because that cynicism, sorry, that you mention is, I think it's probably one of the biggest problems we face in education because we have all of these kind of policies and new things thrown at us all the time that we kind of end up rolling our eyes, don't we, at new things? Whereas we need to be really open to reflection and be vulnerable, and that kind of disappears if you get stuck for too long. Do you think you need to do that in teaching?
I think it depends on the person, and it depends on where you're at.
Right.
My main reasons for the school in Southampton that I left. Yes, I might have always been on a direction of travel to go off and have an awfully big adventure. Right, that I think that might have been like so, and I've been thinking about that since being 17, 18 years old. It's one of the reasons. It's not the reason I went into the profession, but it was definitely something that I was keen to do. I wanted to take it on tour and to see parts of the world. But if you've got a really like trusting, great culture around you in the school that you're in, then the life's blood of any school are actually those teachers who did the 30 or the 40 year career shift there. They become absolutely foundational to school culture.
Yeah.
I guess the culture changes, and that those things are very rarely static. And that's I guess I've always been in a role for, let's say, 4, 5, 6 years, and then if another opportunity's come up, then I've begun to look at things, and that's. But again, it depends. how you, if you go, I always took the view that I'm really responsible for my own professional learning and my own basically self actualization. The person
Mm,
I want to be, I've got a role to play in that. And I remember going for, I think it was a assistant head of faculty role at my first school, and the one of the assistant principal who ran the process at the end of it, basically he described to me, look, if you're just going to wait for things to fall into your lap, that's going to be a really, really, really long wait. You've got to be
yeah,
willing to put your hands up. And if it is about growth, and look, this whole last 16 years has been a wonderful exercise in personal but also professional growth. I've had opportunities here at I've been at 3 schools in New Zealand.
yeah,
And every single one of them has been fantastic in that space. But it's just, I think it's what you bring to it in terms of mindset. And
yeah,
like, if you're open to some hard conversations along the way, because growth isn't always easy, then you're in a place to, well, that's where the self-actualization stuff can happen.
mm. So you kind of get on a plane, you take your life over to
Yep.
New Zealand. What's your first experience of New Zealand, the New Zealand education system? What's memorable? What sticks out as the first thing that you thought, oh, this is different?
Oh, I got picked up by my head of faculty at the airport.
Oh, wow.
That was I was not expecting that. Yeah, Marg, she picked Hats and myself up from Auckland Airport. She drove us back. She let us stay in her house for about a weekend. Um,
Wow.
she gave me her car, which is insane given that. I mean, I didn't tell her I only learned to drive at 24. So so what am I describing? There's this feel that trust is just like, and this is Mark's the head of faculty of a department with 30 staff in it, which is bigger than anything I'd ever been in that point in my career. And big by any school's measure, I think. I'd come from a faculty of about 5 or 6 staff total, right,
Yeah.
to this. And look, she was a phenomenal woman. She is a phenomenal woman. But there was just a degree of trust and personal regard that is there. I remember her advice. I sat down. I was like, I brought because I brought my professional development folder with me. There was like I remember
Wow.
Hattie at the time when we were packaged up. What are you bringing all that for? It's like I might need it.
Yeah.
So I sat down in Mark's kitchen, and she just, because this is my new boss, so I'm like, look, these are the things that I can do. And one of the things that I was mindful of is that, look, effectively, you're kind of going back to zero to a degree. They don't necessarily know what you can do. In terms of, just because it had a significant value in the UK doesn't mean that it's going to have that value in the New Zealand context.
Right.
That's not to say it has no value, but different systems, different approaches. And I was very keen not to fall into a whole, well, in England we do it this way, because
Yeah.
that's something that I've seen staff from overseas, from England, do that, and no one wants to hear that.
No, it's interesting,
There's
isn't it? Because you've gone over there for something different, right? You
yeah.
don't want to take what you've left, really. You want something refreshing and something new.
Oh, and it's also, it's really presumptive to just think that, oh, well, just because it works in one setting, it will
Yeah.
work in another. And this is, at the time, the New Zealand education system back then it's ranked as one of the highest achieving in the entire world. So
Mm.
I came into this with a mindset of, I've got something to learn. All right, there is a
Yeah.
whole, and particularly I remember, like, before my first classes in those spaces, what was Mark describing to me, like the real value of some of the relational elements. And if I
Mm.
describe a difference in terms of the feeling of a classroom at the time, my training in the UK, some really great people that I'd had working alongside me at that first school and developing me, gave me a lot of craft and skill. We didn't really talk about how important relationships were, all right,
Mm.
and how pivotal they are in the classroom. And like, I remember Mark sitting alongside, like, yeah, look, they've got to feel that you like them. It's one of the most important things. And you don't. I mean, we'd love to like every single kid in the world, but they need to feel like it, for your
Yeah.
classroom to be a positive relational element. And that relational aspect to practice is something that it's significantly weighted in the New Zealand setting. And that we're now in a way where, and we might get to this later, where some of the pedagogical aspects are the science of learning stuff is increasingly front and center, and that's no bad thing. I think that's going to be
Mm.
incredibly helpful in improving and making some real gains across the entire sector here. But that relational element was significant, and it's also, I think, mindful of comparing oranges and apples with each other.
Mm.
I I came from a school that was, as I described, near a council estate in Southampton, and I found myself working in one of the most privileged suburbs in this country. All right, the North Shore is it's coastal, it's beachy.
Yeah.
You've got loads of there's significant. There's not to say there isn't inequity here. There absolutely is. It's also not all of New Zealand. It's one very particular part of it, but
Mm.
it was not. And the schools that I went to and the schools that I've been at since, they're not in the same demographic. They have different issues in terms of equity, and there are obviously going to be schools in the United Kingdom that would have that same type of level of privilege. But yeah, to do a straight comparison, I've got very different types of communities, and therefore that's a very different type of challenge in terms of what you are looking at and what you are seeking to do.
Yeah.
I came from a space where it was all about getting over the. I mean, I know they don't have C's and D's and A's. The GCSE grading system completely changed while I've been away. But
Mm.
back then it was all CD board lines and really making a focus on getting kids over that particular line. New Zealand system has different settings, and I found myself with the expectation was high academic achievement in all three of the schools that I've worked at
Right.
in the time in this country.
So you that's the kind of the thing that stood out was this kind of personable aspect as soon as you arrived.
Yeah.
You sent me a lovely article which I really enjoyed reading, and it was titled "Why the Silver Bullets Flying Around Education Will Miss the Target," and it was in the Post, a
Mm.
New Zealand publication, and it stated that Erica Stanford, who is the Minister of Education and still is, as far as I'm aware,
Yep.
clearly has a mission to fix the education system.
Mm.
Um, Now, I know, in my opinion, and many educators' opinions on the current UK education system, a lot of people feel like there's a lot of fixing that needs to be done. But can you
Mm.
tell us, in your opinion, does the education system in New Zealand need fixing?
Oh, I think all education systems need fixing
Mm.
because they've got to stay relevant. But I mean, the specific question, does the New Zealand one need it? I would say it needs refreshing, it needs retooling, it needs to be mindful of trying to stay internationally relevant. It needs to. We've got some things around literacy and numeracy and comparisons around how kids are going in terms of some of those overseas comparison things that aren't where they were. And we then need to have a hard look at where we are. I described a desire, I think, that's really beginning to emerge from the ministry and is absolutely shared by many school leaders. I think it may be challenged by some, but wanting to really ground teaching practice in things like the science of learning, and that can inform what we're looking to do. I mean, the thing I would frame around this, one of the best things about working here. And you talked about the personable nature of things, because it's a small country, because we've got 5 million people here, and what 256 I think secondary schools in the whole country. There's a degree of responsiveness and access to things like a minister of education that
Mm.
you just do not get in other countries. A
Right.
week ago, literally a week ago, the minister of education is at my school, all right, and
Is
she
that
sat
something that
down.
happens a lot?
That can, is not an unusual experience for
Mm.
senior leaders of large secondary schools.
Yeah.
Okay, so and that, I mean, when that happened, I mean, the principal at my school, CJ, he basically, he also, his journey takes him all over the world, but he starts in the UK. And I remember at the end of the day, just taking him aside, and go, isn't that mad? How would that have ever happened with Michael Gove? Would we have,
I mean,
and
I'm not sure how people would feel. I'm not going to say much more, but not sure what the reaction would be if he stepped in to a school.
I, but look, well, I'll name the type of discussion that we had. It's robust. It's like good questions. I came out of it incredibly confident about how well briefed and how informed the Minister of Education is, and
Mm,
I recognise that there's some change that's on the horizon. It's going to be absolute change is never easy. You know, people it's an emotional process, but that's also not that unusual. Like that type of interaction, I can go back 2 years before that, and the former Prime Minister and former when he was Minister of Education, I saw him he stood up in front of a forum of um, basically every deputy principal and assistant principal in Auckland with not, and you could ask him any question you wanted to ask him.
wow. So do you
I,
feel like there's a sense that they know what's happening on the ground more?
that would be my feel. That would be my feel. But you can never be too far away from that in any real aspect of like New Zealand life. The
Mm,
phone network here is called 2 degrees, or one of the phone network here is called 2 degrees, and the reason is because it's two degrees of separation versus 6 degrees of separation, right?
mm,
So everyone knows someone who knows someone, and that means that like one in terms of your personal and your professional reputation, they are things that become increasingly precious. It means that the need to really network and know other people are in your spaces is it's important to be able to get access to other stuff. But it also means that really good ideas. And if I see a challenge for us as a sector here, it's kind of like supporting how we can take things from working really well locally and getting to scale up nationally. That's
mm,
always a significant part of how things can work well in the New Zealand context. Done well, it's brilliant, but it's not something that routinely happens brilliantly. But it can happen, and it can happen quickly because we're dealing with smaller people who are smaller numbers of people who are more interconnected with each other.
mm. And when you've got that close proximity, you're working, there seems to be more trust. And I want to delve more deeply into trust and autonomy,
Mm.
but we're just going to go and listen to the news. So don't go anywhere, anyone. Listen to the news, and then we'll be right back and we'll talk about autonomy in New Zealand.
Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
A lack of maintenance support is creating a two-tier higher education system, says a report in The Guardian. More than half of full-time students are working long hours in jobs to support themselves at university, according to a survey of UK undergraduates conducted by the Higher Education Policy Institute. The survey of 10,000 students found a record 56% had paid employment and were working an average of 14.5 hours per week. Experts said the lack of maintenance support was widening the divide between students who need to work to survive and their better-off peers who are free to concentrate on their studies. When combined with time spent attending lectures, classes and other study, students with part-time jobs are averaging a 48-hour working week, with some completing a 56-hour working week during term time. The average working time for adults in full-time jobs, according to the ONS, is just 36.6 hours per week. Higher Education Policy Institute's Rose Stevenson said the traditional model of higher education, with undergraduates studying full-time away from home, was becoming unattainable, and maintenance support would need to improve in order to support students with the cost of living. According to research, the cost of living crisis abruptly flipped the proportion of students mixing paid employment and full-time study. Before 2021, roughly two-thirds of students had no paid employment in term time. But this year, 56% of students said they had paid employment and were working longer hours than students in previous years. Three-quarters said this was to meet their living costs, whilst 23% said it was to give financial support to families. 80% of students who had been in care were working in part-time jobs. The research also explored how working students completed their studies, with more being likely to use artificial intelligence programs and were more likely to view lectures online. Further details of the study and an additional report by the National Union of Students can be found online via the Guardian website. Money is also a feature in an article by Schools Week. It focuses on a response to a Conservative pledge to protect pupil funding in real terms. According to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, this could lead to the biggest school budget reduction for 50 years. The Conservative manifesto contains a promise to protect day-to-day school spending in real terms per pupil, but the IFS said this would work out as a £3.5 billion cut. This is because pupil numbers are due to fall by 400,000 by 2028. Meanwhile, Labour launched its manifesto with many media outlets covering its pledges on education. The National Education Union General Secretary welcomed the party's commitment to education, but said the proposals contained no indication that education cuts would be reversed. The NEU also expressed concern that Labour's pledge to recruit 6,500 teachers does not go far enough. The NASUWT union also commented on the recruitment pledge, saying it must go hand in hand with tackling the cause of the teacher retention crisis. Manifestos for all parties who have published them are available online. Away from the election, the BBC reports on an experiment undertaken by 10 teenagers from Salford. The teens swapped their smartphones for basic devices that could only make calls or send texts for a period of 5 days. The detox was run as part of a BBC project looking at the smartphone habits of young people. The report covers the positive impact the detox has, as well as the negatives. One of the participants dropped out after just 27 hours because not being online was really stressful. Some, however, found it liberating, as well as helping with sleep and engaging more with friends and family. Full details of the experiment and the responses of participants can be found on the BBC News website. Finally, as a follow-up on a story previously reported on Teachers Talk Radio News, Teesside University has announced it will help fund flights for Nigerian students hit by financial difficulties. Students from Nigeria were thrown off courses and ordered to leave the UK after a currency crisis left them struggling to pay tuition fees. The BBC Tees news website covered events and subsequent protests about the way students had been treated. This resulted in some intervention from the Nigerian government, but Teesside University has also told the BBC that it has re-enrolled some affected students and opened a travel fund, with a spokesperson saying, "We are working with a small group who do need to return to their home country and are opening an international relief fund to offer additional financial support for those unexpected travel costs." Some students have been told they can complete their studies from Nigeria or return to the UK at a later date to complete. Full details of the story can be found on the BBC News website, Teesside section. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News from Joe Fox.
Welcome back, James.
Laura.
I was having a good think, and this idea of trust and autonomy, you were talking about the education minister coming to schools and just, I don't know, just this close proximity of everyone working together. And now where as many in the UK could argue that there are too many schemes, too much rigidity, not enough creativity and educator autonomy. And you tell me that in New Zealand schools, there's some of the most decentralised in the world. But in the article that you sent me, it said that the education minister wants more consistency in what is taught in the schools in New Zealand, as well as how it's taught. So especially like in the core areas of literacy and numeracy. How do you feel about this? Would it remove what makes it special?
I think it's responding to identifying a deficit is no bad thing. Where I described the education system that I arrived at really strongly internationally regarded back in 2007, 2008. And like in terms of a little bit of recent history, you go back to the 70s and the 80s, New Zealand has one of the highest rates of literacy in the entire, in the OECD. That's not the case in 2024. And
What's
if we're looking
changed, do you
at,
think?
sorry,
What's changed? Why is it not?
There'll be loads of reasons underneath it, but if we look at things like the curriculum, the current New Zealand secondary school curriculum qualification (NCEA) is brought in about 2007, the year before basically I emigrated. There is a significant curriculum refresh, a change to the New Zealand curriculum that basically moves it to and if you were to print out the New Zealand curriculum and compare it to, let's say, a GCSE or an A level or an international baccalaureate curriculum, there's a significant difference just in the number of pages that you'd find yourself. You'd look at those two things initially, and what the difference is that it's unpacked in New Zealand in a way that is done by the teachers in the school far more than would be in the UK system. There's a degree of resourcing and basically clarity around these are the ideas, these are the topics, these are the sequences, these are the formative assessments, these are the summative assessments, that back in the UK was very much a flavour of it. In New Zealand, my experience was when I got there, when I got here, it's the school that basically works out how to do that as well as it possibly can, and the qualification system allows that to happen. So if we talk about what, let's say, biology or what chemistry or physics look like in one New Zealand secondary school, it could look like a lots of like exams that basically that those schools could opt in to do. That would be relatively the high stakes, like there's the same type of ideas and concepts and knowledge that you'd need to be able to access a tertiary degree in engineering, for example. At the same time, at a different school in New Zealand, you could have you could still have a physics course or a biology course or a chemistry course, but the standards could be completely different. The actual chunks of work that make up that course could be on completely different things. Those two individuals would end up with they could both say they studied year 13 physics, but there would be differences in terms of like how well that worked to open up particular doors. And that means that this creates this potential for significant inequity between one community and another community. So I think that what we have here is the variability is great in terms of local responsiveness, right? It means that you can really get a feel for the needs of your community, and in spaces where that community really strongly value high academic achievement and really strongly value basically certain pathways, schools have shaped themselves to that. But that will have happened differently in different spaces. Other communities will have far greater value on other approaches. There may be aspects, particularly if you are in a rural community, there's going to be a different pathway or a different set of values around things, and that localism can lead to absolutely different outcomes. So
So you've
I
got
think
one end that where we've got the UK, where perhaps things are really prescriptive, and then you've got New Zealand at the other end. But what we really need is somewhere in the middle. Do you think? Like a bit
I
of both.
think well, it can be incredibly challenging to be able to work out and navigate a whole bunch of quite high level curriculum design ideas at the level of a head of faculty, classroom teacher, or school leader. And that, if we're talking about that, very often we're not necessarily talking about great teaching and learning.
Yeah.
It's and that's the gap there. Now, I mean, there is. I don't feel schools are very much governed here by their local entities for the most part. We're accountable to our boards of trustees.
Which is
The
the
idea,
equivalent of a borough, like the
uh,
borough being
the level down from that, basically the board of governors.
right. Okay. So that's the accountability comes from them only. How often are people above that checking in, checking up on what you're doing?
So I mean, there's ERO, or the Educational Review Office,
Yeah.
and they turn up, but their model is far more collaborative, and it's far more tailored to like what to the actual school. They're coming in effectively, to see like how's your strategic plan going? All right, how are you delivering that? What does that look like? They're looking very much at the leadership capability and capacity of the school and of the board to make sure that what they're looking to do is done well. So that's our school bell. Sounds like an airport. um, uh,
Someone at the door.
no, it means I've got to pick up my luggage to get on the plane at some point. Um,
Oh.
no, I don't. All schools have no bad thing having a bell. Lets everybody know where we need to be. But so where was I at? I was
Yeah, so
describing
we
era.
were talking about that middle ground and the governors being the kind of the person that you're accountable to. And then
Yes,
do you enjoy that level of control though? Because surely that gives you more control over what you're doing. Does that feel good? Is that
massively.
good for your well-being?
If you are resourced, so that
Mm.
model means that a school can resource itself in ways that just don't exist in the English model. All right, and what that's meant for me as a senior leader has been being able to work on some initiatives that just are just beyond the scope of anything that I think could can happen in an English context. We've developed at my school a teaching and learning philosophy that is evidence-based, that is considerate of the science of learning. And that's been the work of a whole bunch of our staff over 6 years. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't, in the UK, you will probably end up with the borough or the academy chain or a whole bunch of provision that you could access to get that. But I challenge how well it could fit the actual context you're in.
Mm.
And that creates its own issues there. So what I'm describing is there's absolutely this potential for phenomenal local responses. The challenge will be it's being able to build and actually really have that expertise. Because if you don't, you may not even know that you don't have expertise, or
Yeah.
because you're seeking to go off and to build it. And that comes back to, look, where have we got to? Why you asked the question, why have things fallen off from where they were in terms of things like literacy, in terms of numeracy, in terms of comparisons to international studies? There's a degree of assumed expertise that is
Yeah.
reliant on your classroom teachers, your middle leaders, your senior leaders, your boards. There
Mhm.
are categorically places in New Zealand that are fantastic at doing that, but it's going to be variable, and that variability, I think, can only lead to an inequity.
Yeah. because everyone's not receiving the same level. And I guess this idea that this autonomy is great if you've got like really skilled workers and that they're constantly learning and reflecting. But if you're kind of in a school that maybe doesn't offer that CPD, the development and really skilling their workers, then that can leave you feeling quite inept, can't it? Like you can't do your job properly.
Or more concerning, you may not even know.
Yeah.
And there may not be anybody who would be able to like support you in identifying that, and that could exist all the way up to the level of leadership there. So that's this is where checks and balances and accountability aren't necessarily bad things. They're all how it's done and and for what purposes. And if you've got really great culture in the school around that type of stuff, then that stuff will really that will go well.
I
But
think you've hit
I
the
think
nail on
there's
the
the
head there. It's
potential.
got to be supportive, hasn't it? It's,
100%.
we've had
But there is
bad
the
experiences with accountability in the UK. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, I remember sitting down with my old head of faculty, and we'd like the post-mortem around like every single kid, everyone's value added, the coming in and checking every, like, have you marked your books in triplicate? Have you got your 3 different coloured pens? Have you put your stickers everywhere where they need to be? A lot of and that's 2007. So what that turns into in the next 16 years, I'm not there to tell you, but there'll be people that will be their lived reality where that became more and more of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the children in this as well. And I know in the Education Minister said in that article that she wants more testing. So I want to talk testing. What is the current situation with assessment and in particular teaching to the test in New Zealand?
I would say it kind of falls into what I was describing around the differences in, let's say, physics in one school versus physics in another school. They could look completely different to each other. And so it then comes down to teaching to what test. To which one? Because you've got some places where it will be entirely coursework orientated. We call those internals, and there'll be some that will lean into externals. There'll be some that will be a model of both.
Who
We've
chooses?
got. Sorry.
Who chooses what approach you take?
Usually the senior leadership team with the head of faculties
Right,
determine what's going to be the best approach for their learners in their school,
right.
and it looks at what particular doors you are trying to open. So I again mindful that the part of Auckland that I live in isn't all of New Zealand. And I would be doing anyone a disservice to, like, if you are in the same way that if you were to assume that, let's say, Islington represented every single part of the United Kingdom, you'd be very confused in terms of like when you found yourself in rural Devonshire. It would be, they're very different places. So
Yeah.
the community that I work in, their expectations are opening up every pathway, vocational and high academic achievement, and that informs our course design. If we don't have courses that are capable of opening the door to the restricted entry pathways, then because of this, they'll start looking at other schools. We do that. We have to do that. We are supportive of growing kids to get there. Do all the kids go off and do engineering? No. Should they? No. It needs to be pathways that are going to really work well for them. But that will not be everywhere. And then it turns into the question you've asked: Are we teaching to the? How is teaching to the tester thing? There are lots of different versions of what the assessments are, and then welcome to the variability. Because there will be some places that will be just get over the line, get as many credits as you possibly can. There'll be other schools that will be like, let's go even beyond NCEA and let's demonstrate that, like, let's support our learners in going off and doing NZQA scholarship, which is it's a whole other exam thing that exists outside of the normal secondary school qualification. And if they're doing that well, that's an absolute banner to anybody who's looking at that school in that community as to that's the type of program that they are. There will be other schools who will pay minimal attention to NZQA scholarship. It won't be something that they would place a high value on. So it all comes down to which test. The challenge then is I have no issue with teaching to a test. It depends on what the test is. And
Yeah.
does that really support the teaching and the learning around that? If you have so many different flavors of that, effectively what I'm describing is an incredibly uneven interpretation of a curriculum in year 11, year 12, and year 13. Locally, where the schools I've worked in, the school I'm at now, It works, and it works well, and it could work. We seek to make it work even better, but that will not be everybody's experience.
Right, we're going to go to the ads again, James, but when we come back, we're going to just delve a little bit deeper into happier children.
Okay.
Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
So, James, we have been discussing autonomy and thinking about autonomy in terms of the system in New Zealand and the UK. And we just moved on to talking about the children. And obviously, you seem to have a lot of autonomy, and we have spoken about the good and kind of, I want to say, I don't want to use the word bad, because, you know, they're just challenges that you face in terms of having autonomy. Well, how does it impact the autonomy of the learner? How much autonomy do the children have? How much say do they have over their day and what they're learning?
This a different amount in different schools and settings. So I guess, I mean, this is the old idea of what student agency is, and very often when I've had discussions with people in different school settings, sometimes you get across to the idea that agency is confused with choice, and the idea of, like, if you're I'll use the example of my own children at home. If I go home and say, what do we want for dinner? I will hear pizza, please, Dad. Dad, we'll have pizza right now. And at that point, it's, oh, hang on, it's no bad thing having pizza. I'm a huge fan of pizza, but occasionally we need to be working in the broccoli. We need to be making sure that they're getting that well-rounded, balanced diet. And so there needs to be a degree of ownership and choice, but it also needs to be mindful of not assuming that the child has a significant amount of privilege that's going to give them support in making good choices. We want to scaffold them to get to those places. So when you're talking about agency, it's the ability to self-regulate, it's the ability to basically to self-manage, to self-reflect, to do all of those things. And those things change with a learner at different points in their actual cognitive development. They're in different spaces. So we're in terms of what kids get in terms of choice. In year 9 and year 10 in a secondary school, there's a whole bunch of, they'll have to do subjects that reflect the New Zealand curriculum. And that will be English, that will be maths, that will be science, that will be social sciences, those will be health and PE. Then there's some other choices in terms of some other subjects where you'll get some technology, you'll get some art. But in terms of the actual what they do and how they go about it in the classroom, that variability that I spoke to absolutely comes to front and center again. There will be schools that, and I work at one that value knowledge rich approaches that are like, okay, let's go from I do to we do to you do. So that when we are really supporting them to go off and really do things in a more independent space, they're doing that on a foundation of they're secure and they know where they're at. There will be other places that, and this is the journey of the last 10, 15 years without, with the science of learning beginning to become an established idea. Different levels in different schools. At my current school, I think it's been part of our conversations for the last 5, 6 years. But there'll be other schools in New Zealand that the idea of working with cognitive load in the classroom is literally it's a conversation they're only beginning to have right now. So that changes their entire potential mindset around agency and where the learner is. It may be you're off doing things that are of high interest and of real student choice, without necessarily really you may be making assumptions around some of the things I described around agency, but that means that it can look incredibly different in different school settings. I described to you.
Sorry, who do you think is best placed to decide what is the broccoli and what is the pizza when it comes to learning?
I think the teacher, the teachers who know the kids best. If you know your learner, you're in a place to locate the learner. The student needs to be able to be supported to do that well. So I think this is the relational element. This is where if you've got a really good dialogic thing going on between the teacher and the student and their families. Right.
Yeah.
If there's that in your school community, it can work well. I guess the challenge here is the assumed expertise, and what if you find yourself in a place where your practices, you may not know that they're not working as well as they could be, or that there aren't the checks and balances that mean that the approach might be mutated in a way where you think you're doing something, but you're not doing it in a way that is actually how it was intended to be described. And if I'm naming a debate that doesn't really exist that largely in a secondary setting in New Zealand at the moment, but is very much a topic of conversation in the primaries. This is the old structured literacy versus balanced literacy approaches, where the fidelity of how you do it, like literally the consistency across schools, is foundational to the approach. And that's how do we do that well when we've built a system that has really supported a degree of you make it fit for you, you do you. So it comes in the New Zealand system. Who is best to determine broccoli or pizza? It is that school community.
Yeah. So it's really I'm just trying to pick apart the parts of the education systems that listening to you, what I would like to take. And I think you're right. I think the teacher is the best placed person because they're the person who get to know the children. But then, like you say, if the teacher becomes isolated in this little classroom all by themselves, they stop seeing and reflecting and growing and developing. So it kind of takes that outside influence, doesn't it, to really grow a teacher. So you kind of need that community feel. But for us, I guess in the UK, like I said, that community feel has actually switched and become quite toxic. And so we kind of want to close the door on it, but we don't want to close the door on accountability, do we? That's not what we're saying. We just want more support rather than judgment. Which seems, would you say that, are you, by changing what you have in New Zealand, are you worried that will happen?
I tend to reject binaries because it's just, I think done well, if we hold on to the responsivity that we've got kind of hard baked in, and it would be hard pressed to lose it. We're not going to change from being we're still going to be a country of 5 million people, in the like who have that 2 degrees of separation, where if you agree or if you disagree, or if you want to find something out, that it's you can get in contact with people who've got the expertise around it. I remember with some of the stuff that we were doing 6 years back around, okay, what's great teaching and learning? I got in contact with like one of the leading academics in New Zealand, Professor Graham Aitken, just around, okay, and there's stuff there that goes back to 20 years worth of teaching and learning stuff that he would have been doing at universities. But he was incredibly kind with his time. In the same way that when we were looking to support our staff in our understanding of cultural responsive practices, there's a Professor Mary Berryman, basically just emailing her and receiving responses from her, or going to conferences and having these type of conversations with people. Whatever happens, that will remain a feature of what we do. So
Yeah.
we will remain responsive. We can't not. I guess it's how we resource the middle ground and how we support the shared understanding in what is a smaller what is a smaller space, but done well. All right, it goes well. It's just. I think a lot of people are now waiting to see um, wherever they sit with the ministry's direction, whether they're relatively on board with it or they are challenging some of the prevailing thinking. The devil's in the detail.
Yeah, I really like that idea that, this rejection of binary, because it does what it does is it blocks us off to a whole idea. And if you're not open to merging and reflecting and bringing ideas together and growing a new one, then you do get very stuck. And I think that, that can be very problematic, as we can see sometimes with certain polarized views in the education system. So important, isn't it, to come together, even if you come from different mindsets, to come together and try to create something new, or you can create really beautiful things out of two ideas that seem worlds apart.
This is what I mean. What I talked about, like the work of the last 6 years in terms of my school's educational philosophy, and what did the staff and the community really, that we want to do everything well. We want to value things from across the continuum of like practices, from like all the way from discovery approaches all the way to like rote learning. All of these things were described as having degrees of value. The challenge here is that people will park themselves, anchor themselves in a particular part, and then they're not open to sliding
Yeah,
across that continuum. And then there are ideas that, like things like the science of learning, are portable across that entire continuum. But you don't know that if you've not spent the time to really unpick it. You could come out of it going, oh well, this just means they just need to. It's death by drill, and it's
yeah.
not. But you don't know that if you've not had a whole bunch of professional learning to get you there. But the challenge with the localism, that at my school, that's where we've gone to. We've spent 6 years there, and that is not a contentious idea. But that would not be the case in other settings.
And just to finish up, James, I want to ask you, how is your well-being in comparison to when you worked in the UK?
Oh, that's sad. You're comparing a 27-year-old man to a 43-year-old. Let's see. I mean, look, if I was asked to describe my well-being back when I was 27, I would have probably said pretty good. I
Yeah,
I love my job. I love where I work. I love my family. They're in a great. It's so I would describe my well-being as good, but
yeah.
even with well-being, I mean, this is the whole self-actualization thing. I believe I am foundationally responsible in many ways for my own well-being. That if and if there was, it, if I've got a good working relationship with my employer, that where I'm feeling listened to and I'm feeling valued, and I had that at the school that I worked in the UK. Although saying that, I did leave because it was moving towards that closure and all that. So those things began to fall away. So I made a decision at that point to start
Yeah.
looking at other options. And I- I've I don't think I've ever worked in a space where I've not felt that, but I park that more on me valuing that responsibility for my own well-being individually and talking that through with the people around me. If I'm not feeling valued and appreciated and nurtured, if I'm not feeling that I'm growing, then it's on me first and foremost to do something about that. I don't, but my lived reality, every setting I've been in, That's how I've had people around me, and I think I've been probably quite lucky in that sense to have a nurturing space where there's been trust, where people have been. It's been good enough for people to have tough conversations, and you
Mm.
can, if you've got that around you, then why are they having that chat? Because they care enough about you to be able to point out that actually, maybe we need to do it a different way, and
Yeah,
so it's all how it feels. But to put it back to your question, how was my well-being? It was good at 27. It's pretty good now.
yeah. And because you've taken responsibility for that, if something's not working, you change it up.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
But this is about growth. I mean, it's also what you value in terms of your well-being. I mean, look, me today, it's my children and my wife, right?
yeah,
And being able to make sure that I'm navigating the work-life balance of being a senior leader in 2024, because
yeah.
that there are. I mean, that can be its own challenge. At the
Mm.
same time, being a classroom teacher and finding out at 27 that there's Ofsted are turning up on Monday, that brings its own challenges. But it's if you are the five people you have around you, that you're spending your most time with, and
Mm.
if that is healthy and supportive and considerate of you, then you are likely to be healthy and supportive and considerate of it. It's a bit transactional, but I do think that in terms of well-being, you've got to take some responsibility,
Mm.
because otherwise you're not growing.
Yeah. James, it's been lovely talking to you, and I feel like I've come away myself refreshed. So I'm sure the listeners will too. It's been really lovely just to take a step back and think about where we're at here in the UK, and what's happening for you guys over there. And I wish you a wonderful day at work.
No worries. Sophie, thank you. Absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.